Welcome to the Finance Magnates Blockchain Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel McIntosh, and this week we spoke to Galia Benartzi, co-founder of Bancor.
Yeah, it's incredible how hard everyone is working in the industry. I don't know if this has been your experience with other projects or entrepreneurs that you've covered, but because everything is growing so fast and also changing so fast, and because the industry is truly global in a way that not many industries have been from day one,
right?
And because everything is live, because of the nature of these tokens and their liquidity, everything is very, very real time. Prices are changing in real time. And so the work has become completely 24/7.
I can imagine.
Your users and your contributors are around the globe in every time zone. Every hour something is happening, which significantly might affect either your strategy or your view on the world, or your partners, or regulation and your entire legal structure and what have you. So it has become a very all-encompassing kind of space to be in. It's incredible.
Yeah, I feel like as a journalist, there's so many different things like every single day. So I can imagine as a, somebody in your position, like how intense that must be. But it's great to be speaking. I think you're like, one of the only women that I've interviewed. So I'm very, very happy to, be speaking to you just because of who you are, but also it's great to, to talk to a woman who's in the cryptocurrency space and, as high of a position as you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. And I'm happy to speak as well and to also represent sort of this topic. And I'll tell you, there's actually a tremendous amount of women in the space, and I think we would all be really well served by highlighting them. I can think off the top of my head, of Kat from Simply Vital Health and Crystal from Sense Token and Elena from Trezor and and Amber from blockchain at JP Morgan and Sheila from blockchain at World Economic Forum, and there are really and Kathleen from Tezos. There really are a tremendous amount. I think the founder of Lightning Network is a woman, Elizabeth Stark, as well. So there are plenty of women at the tops of their organizations, and not as many as there are men, of course, but since our awareness is in this place now, in this era, or at least getting more so, I think it'd be great to make kind of that conscious effort to feature them specifically, and cover their stories specifically. And I think it's good for everyone. I've been quoted in an article also talking about this topic, which is, what's at hand is really the opportunity to redesign the financial system and also redesign the entire economic fabric, right? The way that our systems connect to each other, the way that we understand and value privacy and transparency and collaboration. So these are like fundamental, architectures of society, of civil society. We have the opportunity to redesign it. Are we going to do it with just guys again? Like, that would seem like a big miss. We weren't at the table then, and that's kind of historical context, but we can certainly be at the table now. And I think that if we do make that effort to be at the table and to co-design a system that will support, all the humans, we'll end up with a much better system.
So is that something that Bancor is working for, directly or indirectly?
Yeah, well, so if you expand this concept of inclusivity and access, you could say that we're trying to do a similar thing for tokens. So what do I mean by that? And we'll get into it more when we talk about what Bancor is. But if you just start at the end of what Bancor does, Bancor allows any token to be viable and liquid, regardless of its volume. And that means that for the first time in history, small tokens, small cap currencies, lightly traded tokens, custom tokens, niche tokens actually have a chance to be, real currencies, so to speak. And what that means is real decentralization, right? If you go to just the most meta level, today the only organizations that are capable of creating viable liquid currencies are countries, like on the biggest level. Let's say corporates, if you want to count kind of airline miles or other corporate currencies as viable and liquid. And then in the world of tokens, only the largest ones, right? Bitcoin and Ether and maybe the top 100 are liquid. But if you look at society, we hope that this ability to create a currency which powers a network or a project or an album or a business or a solution, whatever is this economy being powered by this token, there might be hundreds of thousands and millions and tens of millions of these tokens, and if we're only going to let the largest ones be viable, be liquid, we're going to have this kind of exclusive, inside baseball type of structure, which historically tends to favor males, right? Males and also the wealthy and also the white, right? There's sort of categories of humans that historically have been in the small elite groups of access. And when you open things up and say, anyone can participate, you at least have the opportunity to see much more diversity. So if you say any token can be liquid, now you could have small currencies, you could have, currencies for projects that might not normally find themselves on exchanges. You could have, a great diversity in your token economy that today's exchange structure doesn't allow for. And I think if you ask me personally about Bancor, is the inclusivity thing something that we're aiming for and trying for, we see this kind of diversity of access to the creation of capital in society, or to the creation of of value instruments, which is what money really is. We see this as a big nod to inclusivity and diversity, and we call it the long tail. Really empowering the long tail of user-generated currencies to thrive, and the long tail will include, flavors of all varieties in terms of what makes a great token. And today we think of a great token as a big token, but I hope that in the future we'll think of a great token as a useful token, and one that any community of any size is getting value out of having.
Okay, so when you say the long tail, that's just a term that encompasses these smaller tokens and things that aren't these big networks that you're talking about. Right.
The long tail is actually a term that comes from internet terminology. Okay. It's a phenomenon which says that when you lower barriers to entry and you open up access, you'll often find that the long tail, meaning not the top hits, but all of the rest combined will represent more volume, and that can be volume of views like on YouTube, or volume of sales like on Amazon, or volume of traffic. You'll find that the long tail actually represents more volume than the head. So if you take, let's say, the top 10, you'll find that in the top 10 most viewed videos on YouTube, there's less traffic than the next million combined. And so that's an interesting shift that the internet and any kind of open and decentralized service allows us to tap into. And it's interesting also to think that each one of these, smaller, let's say, nodes in the long tail does not suffer by the existence of the other nodes. If you're surfing on YouTube for videos that you like, it doesn't harm you that there are millions of other videos that you don't like, as long as, of course, the UX and the search, and you can find what you're looking for. And this allows any audience to gather around any topic. We can start with what is Bancor, because that'll be a good frame for the rest of the conversation. So Bancor is a decentralized liquidity network. And what this means is that every token in the network is convertible for every other token in the network. So you can buy with any token in the network and sell for any token in the network. The way that the Bancor protocol enables this is by truly networking tokens to each other. So it is connecting each token into this network, and that's what allows for what we call this continuous liquidity. You mentioned that your readers may not want to get too technical, so I'll just say in a few sentences what is the technology paradigm behind this. Bancor utilizes smart contracts to allow tokens to own balances of other tokens. And that ownership basically creates the conversion mechanism. So I'll give an example to illustrate. The BNT, the Bancor Network token, owns a balance of Ether in what we call its connector. It's a module within the smart contract. And BNT can always be bought by depositing Ether into that balance, and it can always be sold and withdrawn and result in a withdrawal of Ether from that balance. So you can think of it kind of like a vending machine that holds, Bancor and Ether. You can always put in Ether and get out Bancor, or put in Bancor and get out Ether. And because Bancor has this mechanism to every token in the network, by what's called transference, every token in the network has this mechanism to every other token in the network. So you can think of it, this is a very simplistic metaphor, but you can think of it like a vending machine that accepts all tokens and will return to you all tokens. And the Bancor protocol essentially standardizes the mathematical formula by which these conversions happen. So when you deposit Ether, this mathematical formula calculates how much Bancor you'll get for that, or vice versa. If you deposit EOS, the mathematical formula will calculate how much status network token you get for that. And it does this for every token in the network continuously. And to summarize that math and how it works, it basically balances the network. So it does this through a ratio mechanism where every token maintains a constant ratio to every other token. And this is, of course, a very dynamic system. If you go back to the vending machine metaphor, people are constantly depositing and withdrawing every token and every other token. And so the balancing mechanism will maintain these ratios between the tokens, and that's how the math produces the price of any token at any given time.
Okay, so and how can this this platform be accessed? Is it, is there an app? Is there like a website? Is it how does that work?
Yeah, so it's already up and running, which is pretty unique to some of the token generation events from our class, at least. Let's say, this summer, like you mentioned. It's already up and running at bancor.network. It's a web app. It's a web application. And it allows you to use any standard Web3 wallet to buy and sell any of these tokens for each other.
Okay, I see. So, and then these tokens that are on the network, can you tell me how smart tokens function on Bancor?
Sure. So the Bancor protocol is a standard for what we call smart tokens.
Okay.
And what makes them smart is this module that I was talking about, this connector module. So the connector module is that balance of tokens that a smart token owns, and it allows the smart token to always offer the token it's connected to in exchange for the smart token. So this is that vending machine concept. So a smart token will utilize the Bancor protocol, will deposit this balance into its own smart contract, into this connector module, and because of this structure, it will always be able to be bought for the tokens that it's connected to, and it will always be able to be sold for the tokens that it's connected to at this mathematical formula.
I see. And if I wanted to create my own token on the Bancor network and hold an ICO, is that possible? And if it is possible, how would I go about doing that?
Yeah, so the full self-service token creation and launch that you're describing is still a couple quarters out.
Okay.
Today, what you can do is create a smart token. You can't actually launch your what we call a TGE, a token generation event, on the Bancor platform, but you can bring your token that you have done a token generation event for, and immediately integrate it into the Bancor network and give it this capability to be continuously bought and sold for any other token in the network.
Okay. And what are the advantages of using Bancor as opposed to one of these other networks that, are commonly used to hold ICOs and should generate tokens like the Ethereum network, which is, people build ERC20 tokens, for example?
Yeah, I would say that today there isn't one platform that folks are launching their tokens on. Mm-hmm. For the most part, what we're seeing in token launches are very technical teams mm-hmm. That are creating all of the software in-house. I don't know of a platform that is live and running that is like the industry standard for launching tokens. Mm-hmm. What people usually like to compare when they think of the Bancor product today is, what's the advantage of offering your token to be liquid on the Bancor network versus, let's say, other centralized exchanges, right? Mm-hmm. Like Bittrex or Bitfinex or, any of the exchanges that we know, or the decentralized exchanges that we know, like Ether Delta and products like that. Mm-hmm. So the benefits of using Bancor are many, and it's important here to say that the Bancor method is a completely new paradigm in exchange. We've never before had a system that would allow for buying and selling of assets or digital assets without matching a buyer and a seller. Right. So in all of the examples that I'm citing, whether they're centralized exchanges or decentralized exchanges, the very act of converting your tokens from the tokens that you have to the tokens that you want is finding another party that wants to buy the tokens that you have and sell you the tokens that you want, right? And so this matching of buyers and sellers is historically dependent on volume. Mm. The more volume of buyers there are and sellers there are, the more likely you'll be matched at the price that you want for these conversions or these exchanges. In the Bancor network, because of the vending machine method that I described, you never need to match a buyer and a seller. The vending machine itself, mm-hmm. the smart token architecture, is always the buyer if you want to sell to it, and it's always the seller if you want to buy from it. And so what that effectively achieves is that in the Bancor network, you can separate liquidity from volume. And that's really the topic that we kind of started with, which is you no longer have to be a very high volume or a highly traded token in order to have liquidity and allow people to buy your token and sell your token as they see fit. So it's one of the benefits that I like to highlight, which is liquidity in the Bancor network is completely disconnected from the volume of your token. That doesn't mean that high volume tokens don't enjoy great liquidity in the Bancor network. We recently listed EOS, activated mm-hmm. EOS. They're a very high volume token, and they have very high volume on the Bancor network, and that's great. But we can also provide liquidity to tokens that aren't being listed wherever EOS is being listed. And so it really is the best of all worlds. Another beautiful thing about the Bancor network is that there are no fees in the Bancor network. This comes from a few factors. First of all, the Bancor is a nonprofit foundation, so it's a Swiss foundation, and it is not looking to build a business on conversion fees, which is kind of the standard business of traditional exchanges. The TGE allows us to build the network, and the value in the network is accrued to the BNT token itself. So in order to connect your token to the Bancor network, you do so by staking some BNT, some Bancor network token, alongside your own. And so the more the network is used, the more the BNT token becomes valuable over time, which really allows the network not to pass on fees to users. The only fees that users pay in the Bancor network are the Ethereum, the underlying Ethereum blockchain fees. So I would say that's another great benefit.
Okay. So I'm just curious, is there, any sort of vetting process for tokens that are listed on Bancor, or do you feel that that's a necessary thing if there isn't one?
So the Bancor protocol is open source, meaning that anyone can utilize. I'll just stay with the metaphor since we started with it, so hopefully it will be clear throughout. Anyone can utilize this vending machine method that we've invented and now standardized. Meaning that any token can list itself in the Bancor network. That said, if there's a problematic token, obviously it behooves Bancor to deal with the situation from a publicity standpoint and from a user experience standpoint. But the network itself is open source, and the network is built to be resilient. You can think of this a little bit like the YouTube analogy, which is kind of the platform versus the users, the super users who are using the platform, right? So you can fight against copyright protection as best you can manually, but generally a platform will pass the burden of proper usage on to its users, meaning that the terms of service require users of the platform to commit that they're using it appropriately. So the Bancor takes a bit more of this platform approach, which is this is an open source network. We don't authenticate necessarily the tokens in the network. That said, it's of course a fine balance, especially at the beginning stages of a network, and it's in everyone's best interest that great tokens will achieve liquidity through this method.
Okay, so you've described how Bancor is providing liquidity for tokens of any size. Is this you said this is already up and running, so can I create a token on the Bancor network already, and will that mechanism function?
Yeah, so again, you can create a token on your own, as most of the TGEs that you're seeing today are doing, and then you can activate that token on the Bancor network. You can't today create a token within our interface, but you can, let's call it import. You can import and activate the token that you've created into this system. Essentially, you can upgrade your ERC20 token, your Ethereum token, into a smart token, i.e., again, to stretch the metaphor, you can add your token to the vending machine.
Okay. And then, you've kind of talked a little bit about where Bancor is headed over the next year, but I'm curious about, the project roadmap so far. Has Bancor managed to stay on track with the goals that it's set for itself so far?
Yeah, I would say we have made tremendous progress in the 8 months since the launch. So today we're already seeing nearly $40 million in weekly conversion volume among tokens in the network. We've seen already over $400 million worth of total conversion volume in the network. We have 40 live tokens that you can, that are already buttons in this vending machine that you can press, and we have 100 more announced integrations. So these are tokens that are, en route to completing their launches and have committed to adding themselves to the Bancor network once they are launched. We've had nearly 200,000 users per month in the Bancor web app.
New users.
Sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry, 200,000 new users per month, or?
Nearly 200,000 users a month, yes, are using the Bancor web app.
Okay.
And so it's really tremendous progress in a short amount of time, especially considering, the newness, not only of the Bancor protocol and the innovation of this method, but also of the underlying blockchains, right? The foundation that we're building on, Ethereum, is also relatively new and still dealing with its own technological issues in terms of scaling. Like we said at the beginning, everything is moving really fast. So yes, we've achieved a tremendous amount, and in terms of our development roadmap, we're right on track. We always strive for more. And the plan for 2018 is very aggressive in terms of the number of tokens that we'd like to see live, the volume that we expect to see, both as the industry grows in general and as our platform gains gains visibility. So there's, we've done a lot, and there's so much more to do.
Yeah, and so Bancor, has, it seems like a really great platform within the cryptocurrency space, for creating these tokens and providing liquidity. But, people are always concerned about how these crypto systems are going to operate within, the rest of the world. And are there any specific ways in which Bancor is designed to operate, in spaces outside of the cryptocurrency space specifically, or is that something that's more, on the onus of the token creators in Bancor?
It's actually fundamental to what Bancor does. So if you go back to this ambition to enable the long tail of currencies, the long tail of currencies, is hundreds of millions of currencies, and these are regular people using these currencies, creating these currencies. This is not limited to a cryptocurrency or even to a blockchain industry space. What we love about the long tail of currencies specifically is this concept of community currencies or complementary currencies, which is really, providing value instruments to groups, whether they're, in physical proximity, like a neighborhood or a club or anything like that, or just, affinity groups like mothers in a certain area or, students in a certain area. Giving them tools to collaborate, right? Because that's what money really is. Mm-hmm. It's a tool that lets us work together. It's like our shared accounting system. And when you can break this down securely, of course, thanks to blockchain and cryptography, and allow more groups and more, networks of people to have their own value instruments, you can think of it like the efficiency that you might hope for out of like local governments, right? Where a local government knows the people better and is closer to the issues and can handle, a specific incident within a neighborhood better than like the federal government could handle it for you. And it really is the same thing with monetary instruments. So we have our national monies, and those are really great, in some ways for our mass collaboration, but smaller groups can actually collaborate much more efficiently with these custom tools and these custom tokens. And so when we look forward, and I don't think we're that far away, there are a few different moving pieces that will get us to this vision, but when we look forward at 2018 and 2019, we certainly see the mandate of cryptocurrencies as allowing the mainstream consumers to benefit from what these tokens have to offer, and whether that's the tokens we know today, like Ethereum and Bitcoin, being more usable and accessible, whether that's services like remittances and payments and banking services for the unbanked, or even identity services for for refugees. There's no lack of use cases, but it really is the more meta narrative of allowing groups to collaborate and to govern their collaboration, including economic collaboration, in a more custom and opt-in way than we've ever seen before. And it really is only the mainstream, the mass adoption of these technologies that is truly interesting.
Yeah, there was actually a woman in Detroit who was running for mayor, and one of her platforms was that she wanted a universal basic income through Dcoins. She was going to make a blockchain for Detroit. So that's really cool that you brought up the community coin thing.
Yeah, actually, the president of the Bancor Foundation is a guy named Bernard Lietaer. He's a really interesting man with a good body of work, some fascinating books around, what is money and how can we make money better. And his claim to fame, or originally, is that he worked in the Central Bank of Belgium, and he was on the original team that was brought in to create the euro for the ECB. Okay. And famously, he left the project because the politicians changed the proposed euro from what the economists proposed it to be to what it is today, which we know as being a problematic tool for Europe, and they were really in protest of this model because of these problems that they could foresee in the 90s, that we would have the Greek problem and the Italian problem and the way that things are, the Spanish problem, the way that it's unfolding. So Bernard then went into academia and really studied this topic of community currencies and how can you create more well-being and more abundance for communities, knowing that the political and financial system at the top is not going to supply these tools for people, or not going to effectively supply them. Mm-hmm. So I really encourage you to check out his work, and we can send you some videos and some links to his work, which you might find interesting, right on this topic of how can communities utilize their own generated currencies to achieve the effects of what universal basic income comes to offer, which is, basic welfare, basic well-being. Maybe it's housing, maybe it's food, maybe it's dignity. There's a few different ways that you can measure what basic means. Mm-hmm. But certainly, community currencies have a strong role to play, because you can think of it like a quantitative easing for a specific community, right? It's like airdropping a new budget on people. And if you believe that these specific people that you've airdropped the new currency to can find ways to exchange this currency amongst each other and supply each other with the basic needs, whether it's food or housing or well-being or otherwise, we can create this mesh network of universal basic well-being through cryptographic tokens.
Okay. So, thinking like 50 years down the road, like, perhaps if you're no longer involved in this project, or, so far in the future, where do you expect Bancor to be then? What do you think that this will be a long time from now?
Well, the really interesting thing about these technological developments is as great as this, and when I say this, I mean blockchain decentralization and then a Bancor liquidity network that allows anyone and everyone to utilize this new access, is that we don't know how the tool will truly and best be used in the future. It's like, if you look at the internet in the 90s, we for sure knew that Yellow Pages would become yellowpages.com, right? Or that the Encyclopedia Britannica would become encyclopedia.com. But did we know at the beginning that we would have Wikipedia, where everyone could crowdsource the encyclopedia and it could change in real time and we could vote on how it would look? Or that we would have Yelp, where we'd have a yellow book, Yellow Pages, with everyone being able to upvote and downvote and kind of change a business's rankings in real time. So the interesting thing about the long tail of currencies, or long tail of tokens, is that we don't know yet. We have many guesses, right? Loyalty points and small business networks and community currencies and project tokens, like, let's say, Golem or Augur, things that we already see. But really the big wave of innovation is down the road. You can even think of it like the kids today will be teaching us what are the cool and best ways to use tokens a decade from now. Today, we know how to tokenize models that we can already think about. But, the real paradigm shift is that these technologies will let us create models we can't even think about right now.
Right. Okay.
What Bancor knows, that's a big statement. What Bancor knows is that liquidity is essential between these tokens, no matter what they do. That in order to not find ourselves again in a paradigm of isolation, where each network or each blockchain or each currency needs to kind of build up its volume from scratch in order to be viable, we know that doesn't lead to the most efficient collaboration and the most open access. So we really work on this liquidity piece, which is allowing every token to be inherently and automatically convertible for every other token, thus allowing any token to emerge and really focus on their product and on their users and on their innovation, and not have everyone kind of working on this volume problem and working on this liquidity problem.
So can I ask then how, on that note, are, tokens within the Bancor ecosystem and the Bancor token itself, like, is that interoperable with other blockchains that aren't part of the ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question. So up until today, we've been an Ethereum-based protocol and an Ethereum-based network. So all of the tokens today that are listed on the Bancor network are Ethereum tokens. But we just announced this week a collaboration with EOS. And so we will be supporting the EOS blockchain when they launch, and the EOS blockchain will implement the Bancor protocol. And from the beginning, we've said that to be truly a liquidity network and not, a specific liquidity solution, the Bancor network has to be cross-chain. We're not looking to empower liquidity on Ethereum or liquidity on EOS. We're looking to empower liquidity for tokens, wherever those tokens may be. So certainly the burden of technological adaptation is on us to support these various blockchains and also connect between them. But you can also almost think of Bancor like the UN of currencies, or what the UN could be for currencies.
Okay. Well, Galia, I'd like to switch gears a little bit to talk about the Bancor ICO, because it's still one of the largest ICOs in history. It drew in, I think, 144 million. What was the reason behind raising such a large amount of funds?
Yeah, so technically speaking, it was 153 million.
Okay.
And again, that's worth of Ether on that day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And important to contextualize that Ether on that day was about 400, which was the highest Ether had ever been. And just a week later, Ether was 130, which was the lowest that it had been in that time frame. Mm-hmm. And today, fast forward, Ether has already hit 1,300 as its highest, and today hovers somewhere around 900, 950. Mm-hmm. So I just share that because it's important to contextualize that the sizes of these raises or the sizes of these contributions are measured in that currency, mm-hmm. But that currency itself is not yet a stable value that we can point to. Nevertheless, it's a tremendous amount mm-hmm. Of contribution, no matter which price you're measuring it at.
Yes.
And so there's a couple things that are important with the Bancor TGE. First of all, in order to create a liquidity network like this, it's essential to endow the network. You can think of it like the jump start for the vending machine, like jump starting the power. Mm-hmm. It's important to endow the network with liquidity on day one. And so the interesting thing about the Bancor TGE in comparison to other TGEs is that the size of the contribution actually directly relates to the size of the liquidity that the network starts with. Mm-hmm. It's not just a budget, right? It's not just that if we raised 10 or $1 billion, that's how much funds the team has to execute the project. It's that the network itself would have 20% of 10 or 20% of $1 billion mm-hmm. endowed into the network, locked into the smart contract, in order to jumpstart the liquidity network itself. So that's kind of a unique thing about Bancor, and in fact, 20% of the cap, and I'll get into the cap issue in a moment, but 20% of 250,000 Ether, so 50,000 Ether, is locked into that connector module of BNT. Remember, I said that the Bancor network token has this Ether balance. Mm-hmm. So that's to the tune of 50,000 Ether. Today that's something around $40 million mm-hmm. That are locked into the BNT smart contract. That's not a budget for the team. That's not that's the liquidity right. Of the network. So that's a significant thing. The other unique thing about the structure of the Bancor TGE is that the project set for itself a hard cap, which was 250K Ether, which again was measured in that era's prices, right? And again, Ether hit 400 on the day of the launch, but only a week before the launch, Ether was in the hundreds, mm-hmm. like the individual hundreds. So when we set that cap, it was a very moving target, and things mm-hmm. were moving really quickly. But the cap was 250K, and basically what Bancor came to say, and again, this was a time of great learnings, right? Because there was no blueprint for how to do this or how to do this best. But what we came to say was we want our token generation event to be as inclusive as possible. We want the most people who want to participate to be able to participate. And we had been watching some of the TGEs before us. If you remember BAT, the Basic Attention Token, if you remember Gnosis, the prediction market, there were a few that came before us, and we watched them. QTUM, I think, was just that week. We watched them sell out in 30 seconds, or in 2 minutes, or in an hour. Not an hour, in 20 minutes. And we thought, this is not a great model. What does this mean that things are selling out in 20 seconds? It means that, first of all, there's a lot of stress of trying to be there first. It means that in order to get into some of these token generation events, folks are paying very high gas fees, because when you pay a higher gas fee on your transaction, you can line jump. And so folks were paying, tens of thousands of dollars to prioritize their transactions over others because it was worth it. If you could get in, you could more than make up for that difference, because there was so much demand left out of the sale that you could count on, utilizing that demand after the sale to recoup your fees. So you ended up with the situation where, again, the wealthier you were, or the larger your transaction was, or the more inside information you had to be able to get in early, the more likely you were to get into these token generation events, the more likely you were to make money from the demand that was left unsatisfied outside. And we thought, this is, more of the same. This is the system that we've already seen. The wealthy get wealthier. Those with access get more access. And we wanted to create a model that was different. And so what we came up with at the time was, let's set a cap for the project, but let's also say that within a certain time frame, everyone who wants to get into the project can get in. There will be no line jumping. We set a max gas cap for the sale, meaning for the generation event, meaning that there was no possible way that you could skip the line, no matter how much money you have. And let's let everyone in for the first hour. And in order to handle this backlash that we would get of, hey, you might raise 100x what you actually set out, you might, experience contributions to the tune of 100x of what you set out, or what you thought the project might need. We said, you know what, everything above this cap that we're setting, so if that is the case, and this hour of allowing anyone to participate yields a tremendous amount of contribution, more than we had planned for, all of that delta will go into what we called the price floor contract. All of that delta will be stored separately and will be sitting there and will be available to the community to essentially sell back their BNT at any time and get back their Ether at any time. And the purpose of that was really to create a kind of calmness and a sense of stability in order to guide the token in its first few weeks out of the gate. Because what we were seeing, again, with many of the other launches, was these, very, very high octane sales, and then huge spikes, and then huge crashes. And we wanted to do something different. We wanted everyone to be able to participate, and we wanted to create the kind of stability that would, behoove a network like this, that is meant to be very open and very accessible and very long-term and stable over time. So that was our thinking, and these were, the best ideas that we had to achieve those goals. And then came reality, which was that in the first 20 minutes of our token generation event, a couple things happened. Our servers were attacked, so there was a large-scale DDoS attack on our servers, which made it very hard for us to update our website and communicate with the public about what was going on. And also, the Ethereum network experienced record-breaking congestion. And we can send you these graphs. We posted them at the time, but if you look at what the Ethereum network experienced during the Bancor TGE, it was like literally a 20x spike over any traffic they had ever seen. And this caused transactions not to clear within this first hour that we had promised the community would be open to everyone. And so that generated, a real-time decision that needed to be made about how to handle that. Do you just shut it down and not achieve the goal of allowing everyone to participate, or do you extend the time and allow everyone to participate, but not achieve the goal of being open for 1 hour only? And what we decided was that the goal was not the hour, the goal was the participation, to allow as wide of participation as possible. And so at the time we extended the time frame to allow some of the clogged transactions to clear. I think, if hindsight is 2020, and today we have many, many more blueprints, both for what to do and what not to do, and how to handle these things. It's important also to remember that the innovator's dilemma is that you don't know at the time, what to expect and how things will unfold. But when I speak to teams that are launching tokens and I give them, my insights on do's and don'ts, it's first of all, expect the unexpected. So there's a lot of things to anticipate going wrong. One of the more impressive feats of the Bancor TGE, I believe, is that despite it all, we managed to maintain a very, very secure environment. You can imagine that collecting $150 million worth of Ether is no simple feat. Not even one Ether was misplaced or hacked or stolen. And everything is safe and secure. And this is a very, very big technical undertaking, especially for teams that are not very well capitalized when going into these projects. And so I tell teams to expect the unexpected, to really think through security, and to really think through how they're phrasing the parameters of the event for their audiences and for their contributors, and allowing everyone together to understand what is known and what can't be anticipated ahead of time, and maybe how the team thinks about real-time changes or real-time adapting to the realities on the ground. I think all those things are helpful. I think since then, a lot of industry standards have developed. Like, there's no need to cap the time of these launches so tight. We've seen the EOS now very successfully run a 1-year token generation event that is still in its, I think it's in Q3 of its. They launched just after we did, and their TGE is still ongoing. Many people aren't aware of that. Tezos, which was just after ours, was a 2-week TGE. Many are doing month-longs, and I think that this bigger, faster is not necessarily better. I think that every project can really think through the custom design which achieves their goal. And again, if I go back to the Bancor, what Bancor was trying to achieve, I think we absolutely did achieve it. We had almost 11,000 contributors to the token generation event, which at that time was an unheard of number. And of course, the amounts contributed were also unheard of at that time. So I think we certainly achieved our goal, but not without a tremendous amount of arrows taken up the hill.
Yeah. So now that that it was a, I guess you could say, a different time when the Bancor ICO took place. Since then, governments and financial institutions have been, kind of scrambling to find ways to regulate ICOs. We've had bans in China and Vietnam and Morocco and different places like that. How do you think that regulations, in the next, 2 to 5 years, how do you think ICOs will change?
Can you say that again?
Just how do you think that regulations, will affect ICOs and how they're held within the next 2 to 5 years?
I think it will affect them tremendously. A lot of the energy that the teams are expending going into these projects is really around structure, regulatory and legal structure. I think if we had more streamlined blueprints for how to do this, teams could be spending much more of their time on their tokens and on their teams and on their products. So I think that will really help. I think that we'll have a lot more best practices around consumer protection. I think we'll have a lot more best practices around KYC and what are the different parameters that folks want to be understanding about their audiences before, during, and after these kinds of launches. So I think it's only going to get better. Of course, the jurisdictions that will create regulations that will be, very, very unfavorable to these kinds of projects will find themselves not having these kinds of projects within their jurisdictions. That said, I don't think the world will find itself not having these kinds of projects. I think that this technology has, in a sense, passed the point of no return. But we really look forward to the next few years of really healthy dialogue and collaboration between entrepreneurs, technologists, business folks, and regulators, so that we can create, a great world that we all want to live in.